Всем привет, добрый день. Guys, good day, good afternoon to you from Minsk. Hope you're having a good start of the week. I certainly am. Got some plans, of course, lined up for this weekend and, of course, next week as well. Beautiful here. Where I am right now, I'm in Park Chelyskotsev. Just outside the city centre here in Minsk. And it's quite a very, very nice place to go, even in winter. We have a wide variety, different kinds of deciduous trees. And this place actually was built sometime, I think it was in the mid-1920s. I think it was part of an estate before it got nationalised. And what a great amenity we have right here in the centre of Minsk. Of course, when it was first founded, this was on the outskirts of the city. The city has grown a lot since then. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about wildlife and parks, etc. and so on. This video here is a bit of a follow-on from a number of previous videos that I made earlier on, over the last 2 months or so. And it's sticking with the theme of, you know, moving abroad, taking a chance, and so on. While I was browsing the internet a couple of days ago, this headline actually popped out in front of me. And according to the article, it says 70% of Ireland's young people considering emigrating to secure a better quality of life overseas. I have to say, when I actually read this article, it kind of popped out, it kind of surprised me a bit. But when I sat back and reflected on it further, actually it didn't. Now, as you know, we're part of the European Union. Ireland is part of the European Union. It enjoys a very high standard of living, and for some, a good quality of life. So I decided to investigate a bit further as to why, and I did a bit of digging into this. So when you look at the GDP figures, Ireland is actually number 2 in the European Union, just behind Luxembourg, and this should indicate a very, very wealthy economy and a lot of happy and satisfied citizens. But apparently, when you dig a bit further, that is actually not the case. So on that, I decided to actually delve deep, and I decided to explore as to why a lot of young people are actually disillusioned and unhappy, and of course do want to leave. Now, the big problem is, of course, is the cost of living. Now, as I remember, back home we do have higher salaries than we do here in Belarus, but the problem is, for a lot of young people, for a lot of young professionals, when they are graduating from university, the problem is finding decent, suitable accommodation. And when you add up the costs of renting, now if you want to make something of yourself in Ireland, Dublin is the place to be. Dublin is the powerhouse of the Irish economy, and it isn't looking good. And when you come across headlines like this, it is actually quite depressing. And for a lot of young professionals, the prospect of actually finding a house, getting a mortgage, is increasingly out of their reach, in contrast to their parents' generation. It is quite remarkable, to say the least. And if you do manage to get a mortgage, well, how do you raise a family? Childcare, there's a big problem. And guys, I haven't actually taken into account inflation. Inflation back home is running at approximately 7.6%. Yeah, it is. When you add all that up, it can be quite a challenge, of course. And of course, the elephant in the room being the massive public and private debt that is evident in Ireland. So why is this happening? Why do we have a shortage of rental accommodation? Why are people complaining about average daily costs, childcare, healthcare, etc., and so on? And let's focus a bit on property here. Okay, so the reason why we have such a shortage of property and young people cannot find a place to rent is the following. Now, back in 2008, the Celtic Tiger hit the wall, and so what the Irish state decided to do was that they decided to the state decided to bear the brunt of the losses of the bondholders and, of course, of these property magnates. So they set up what was known as a NAMA, National Asset Management Agency, in which the Irish government, the Irish state, took on all the bad debts, okay, from the property and credit bubble that had built up over the last number of years. previous, about 10 to 15 years previous. And what you had was that the Irish nation was now saddled with a huge public debt on top of the private debt that had already existed. The developers, the high developers who borrowed a lot of money, actually had the debt removed from them. And when the economy improved from about 2012 onwards, many of these developers were actually able to get the property back. So it was a form of socialism for the rich, capitalism for the poor. Add in, moreover, the very, very poor and chaotic red tape when it comes to acquiring property or land. And this all comes down to the dysfunction of local government and, of course, law in relation to assets in Ireland. Getting back to the previous conversation, Ireland, of course, on paper has the second biggest economy in Europe, the second wealthiest economy in Europe because of the GDP. We're just below Luxembourg. And people ask, well, if we are so wealthy, why do we have these problems? And it all comes down to what's GDP and what is actually in the main economy. However, the real economy tells a completely different story. It does. So, as I mentioned, we have one of the highest GDP in Europe, in fact, not in the world. And this is brought about, as I mentioned, as a result of multinationals moving their profits to Ireland as a tax haven, tax-free, and then moving it on to another destination. However, when you look at the real economy, and this is in relation to the annual disposable income of a household, you will see we have a completely different figure, different scenario. Vast majority of the workforce who are working in the general economy. And that is why you have such a disparity. GDP figures are high on one hand, and the real figures, the disposable income, on the other hand. And when you couple that, combine that with the situation regarding accommodation, childcare, healthcare, inflation, etc., for an ordinary worker, it makes things a lot more difficult. And that is why we have the findings in our survey, which says a lot of young people are angry and disillusioned and such, that they want to leave and go to another country or countries in order to improve their quality of life. And it's kind of very, very understanding. And I've actually I've said this before on my previous videos, in that if you do have the opportunity to get a better quality of life abroad, then by all means move to another country. If that opportunity opens, take it if you have that opportunity. Even if it means that you give up your work, you save a bit of money, retrain and move abroad. I know a lot of my friends, school friends, who actually moved to quite a lot of different countries: UAE, Norway, the United States, Germany, etc. So yeah, if you see that opportunity, seize the day, carpe diem. That is my advice to you, and it's advice that I will repeatedly give to a lot of people and such. However, the Irish economy, as we know, on the outside things are looking very, very rosy. However, that is not going to last. And the reason is because two double whammies. The first one is the conflict in Ukraine and its effect on the wider European economy. And of course, even bigger is the news coming from China and the deflationary effect on that economy. One thing that has struck me is the amount of investment that has taken place here in Minsk over the last 6, 7, 8 years. And this here, just outside Park Cheluskitsev, this is actually a new development. Prodam means to buy. So new apartments springing up here in Minsk. Quite a lot of them indeed. I think the average price here for a new apartment here, a new build, could be something in the region of between $60,000 and $70,000. Anyway, where was I? Okay, so that's my little segue into talking about the war, the conflict in Ukraine, and how that is affecting the economies of Europe. Rust Belt on the Rhine, the deindustrialization of Germany. If Europe's economic motor stalls, the continent's already polarized political landscape will shudder. And the reason why this is happening, as we know, that Germany is the powerhouse of all the different European economies and the wider European economy as well. Now, before the conflict, more than 50% of Germany's energy needs actually came from Russia, but the sanctions against Russia has forced Germany and indeed many other European economies to decouple from cheap Russian energy. And of course this is having a huge effect on the European economies, especially on the German economy. And what happens in Germany will also affect what happens in Ireland. So, confronted by a toxic cocktail of high energy costs, worker shortages and reams of red tape, many of Germany's biggest companies, from giants like Volkswagen and Siemens to a host of lesser known smaller ones, are experiencing a rude awakening and scrambling for greener pastures in North America and Asia. Add in the inflation as well, especially the inflationary effects on the economies in the Baltic states. Very good article from Italian journalist Thomas Fazzi in The Compact, and he writes, America is deindustrializing Europe. Thomas Fazzi makes a very, very compelling case that the United States is deliberately deindustrializing Europe in order to remove Europe, especially Germany, as a competitor, attract the European companies, multinationals, to the United States, and to focus on China. According to the Atlanticists in both Brussels and in Washington, China is the #1 rival. And of course then the news from China, the double whammy, not only the war in Ukraine, the inflationary effects, but also what's going on in China. I just had a look at today in the New York Times. China's stalling economy puts the world on notice. And of course China was of course affected from the Mexican beer shutdown, the lockdowns, and the news from China of course is not good. And China's economy has slowed substantially in spring, extinguishing hopes of a robust expansion after the lifting of extreme Mexican beer restrictions. So this week brought data showing that China's exports have declined for 3 months in a row, and not to mention the signs of distress on the housing market, and also prices have fallen on a range of goods. So the demand for Chinese exports and of course Chinese imports and within the wider economy is falling, and of course this brings us deflation. And of course this is not good, and this indicates that Europe of course could see a particularly nasty recession coming up. Not good at all for the wider economy. However, the saving grace for China is this: China of course has an industrial base. It does also have a command economy, and it can use its resources to kickstart the economy again. And this also benefits Russia, as China trades has increased with the Russian Federation. So overall, not good news for the West. Now, in relation to the security situation, back to the conflict, there on Friday, was it Saturday, Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, warned that NATO had amassed a total of 300,000 plus troops, and that came on the news that Poland has sent an extra 10,000 troops towards the Belarusian border due to the presence of Wagner in the country. Of course, of these 10,000 troops, 4,000 will be deployed with the border guards. A further 6,000 will be held in reserve. However, as I mentioned in a previous video back in December, yes, we are moving. We are on the escalator, and we are moving into what is a very, very dangerous time period. Right now, we are coming into an epoch of history. This is a very unique part of time in history, and we're seeing a unipolar power, that is the United States, slowly but surely losing its dominance across the planet. And as its influence is decreasing, it is lashing out at what it sees as its perceived opponents, that of course being Russia and especially the People's Republic of China. As I said, people have been talking about war, the outbreak of World War III, a transcontinental conflict, an increase in destabilization in the world, especially in the political and economic climate. However, I, of course, being the eternal optimist, I think that yes, as I said, we are going through a very difficult period in time. The next few years will be especially dangerous. However, I do believe that we will come out of it better and stronger in a multipolar world. Let's keep the fingers crossed. Okay. Well, that is it, guys. We shall leave it at that for today. I'll keep you posted on updates, and we'll see you there and then. So from Minsk, it's do svidania, do streci. Slangofon.